Yo everybody, what's going on? This is Keegan from Kman Reviews. If you enjoyed this review, make sure you hit that like and the subscribe button. And if you have any opinions at all that you would like to share, make sure to leave them down in the comment section. Xhef and Filip Neuf. Terminal. Xhef is an American underground rapper and songwriter, one who is not actually new to this channel. Older viewers might remember I covered his last album, Extension of the Hand. The link will be in the corner if you're curious to go check that out. But now he is finally back with his latest project, Terminal, this time fully produced by Swedish hip-hop producer Filip Neuf. Xhef promoted this album with the intention to listen to it from front to back with no interruptions, which kinda goes against my general reviewing format, but I'm gonna try my best to make it work, so let's just dive in. What are my thoughts on Terminal? Let's find out as I review it track by track. Since there weren't any singles, we will just start at the top of the track list, with that being the title track, Terminal, being a pretty perfect way to start a record like this. The instrumental is pretty somber and mellow, with a muted, foggy bass drum, downtrodden horns, and static that give the track a fittingly depressing tone. At about the halfway point, however, we get an unexpected beat switch with an almost boom-bap aura, more prominent drums and upbeat melodies, and an invigorating flow from Xhef. It sure is one way to get a listener invested. Lyrically, we start to see the beginning of this concept of the record. The protagonist gets diagnosed with a terminal illness, and he knows he doesn't have much longer to live. But we see in the second verse his motivation and desire to write even when he's dead. It's a potent opener, and it sets the scene well. For Today People, featuring Brent Braun's Know It All and Morning Run, is probably the closest on this album to a tried and true typical banger, and is also likely to be the song that thrives the most, separated from the concept of the core record. This pasta cut is laid over this smooth, glossy, pulsating beat with snappy drums, metallic ringing of cymbals, a lustrous synth melody, and the ever-present looped soul vocal sample. The three featured MCs all do extremely well. I'm especially fond of Brent and Morning Run's verses, even if neither of them really stick to the core theme of the record. Thankfully, Xhef still does, and I think his verse is my favorite of the four. Plus, he rid this off-kilter flow a lot better than his contemporaries. All in all, this is a banger. If you only decide to check out one song from this album, make it this one. Still Alive is the first in this stretch of really emotional and hard-hitting tracks on the album, and that first sign is shown by this instrumental. Warm waves of synth, melancholic strings, and a brittle yet organic drum loop with this bass rhythm that sounds like a heartbeat. Might not be the most striking instrumental, but it does its job well. Xhef continues his streak of following atypical flows, and I'm a fan every time he does it, this one included. The lyrics continue the record's theme, with this protagonist really coming to terms with his own mortality, imagining his funeral, and dedicating himself further to writing and the overall craft. Really nice song. Never is where we really start to see the deep emotional side of the record. For one, this beat is noticeably darker, heavier, and more somber than the previous tracks, with a cavernous usage of sample, a general echoey ambience, and more grungy percussion. It's the kind of beat you hear and you just know right away that shit is about to get real, and shit definitely gets real when Xhef hops on the track. It doesn't take long to notice the palpable fervor in his voice, and our protagonist really seems to struggle with coping, realizing the things he'll never get the chance to say, do, or experience, and wallowing in a lot of regrets, and even seeming to go through an existential crisis near the end of the song. It's a gut punch of a track, but I love its inclusion in the context of the record. Lost Time is without a doubt the emotional peak of the record, and I adore this one. We see a little bit more of an unhinged instrumental with flashier keys, soaring sampled vocals, and a bit of a faster tempo in the percussion. Honestly though, it's Xhef's vocals that really sell this track for me, sounding like he's on the brink of an emotional breakdown, trying to get out all the words left in his head. And that intensity rises until it just stops, and Xhef's last words come out as a mutter. The lyrics do corroborate the vibe of this track, with Xhef really coming off as scared now about his impending demise, and really hoping to cement his ideal afterlife of being remembered through what's been said and not how he lived. I do kind of wish there was a harder cut at the end to symbolize that. I think it would have really driven the track home, but as it stands, this is excellent. Part of the deal pretty much builds up this hard wall between the two halves of this record. It's an entirely different vibe from anything prior. The instrumental is minimal and dissonant, with hazy synths, echoey sample usage, and no drums. Compared to the livelier sound of the earlier tracks, this is a stark contrast, and Xhef's initial lines follow suit, as he almost sounds defeatist and numb, like he's reached a point of acceptance. That nervousness begins to creep in as the track reaches its conclusion, where our protagonist meets his foreshown death, detailing his funeral and the aftermath of it. Not a track I'd willingly listen to by itself, but it's very well done here. Eyes of God is pretty much an interlude on the record. The instrumental is exclusively this repeated, sporadic keyline and dusty cymbal, an imperceptible bass, as we get a mostly incomprehensible vocal passage that gets audible at the end. It's a very odd track, and I was a bit stumped at first as to how it connected to the rest of the record, and honestly, I'm not sure if I want to reveal all the info because I feel like that would lose a lot of the mystery and excitement around this record, and also because xhef kind of helped me with that himself, so I'm not going to say anything. Like I did say though, this one's more of an interlude, doesn't shine on its own, but works well enough in the context of the record. The tree pretty much confirms that we've entered the calmer, less frantic half of the record, which makes sense given where we are in the concept of the album. The track has a very warm atmosphere with its watery synth and appropriately angelic keys. xhef also has this echoey, layered effect on his voice that makes it feel more ethereal and otherworldly, which is again very fitting. Lyrically, I'm pretty sure this is supposed to draw connections from the mythological tree of life, which is often connected to immortality, again an underlying theme of earlier tracks. This one kind of falls into the same feelings I had of most tracks on the album, where it isn't a song I listen to individually, but works so well on a full album scale. Continue is probably the most optimistic sounding song on the album. The vibe and the general aura of the track feels very sunny, from the sample to the fluttering synth, and even the organic drums have a bit of skip to their step. xhef also sounds lively on the track, delivering his unique and unorthodox flow with a kind of confidence and serenity that really makes you pay attention to what he's saying. Speaking of what he's saying, these lyrics are dense, man. Some I don't even fully understand, but the general theme I get from it is that he's at peace and content with how he lived his life and what he left behind. And in the final bit of the track, realizing that he's now one of the samples to eventually be found and flipped. I like that. It's another great track here. To the Love, one of the longer tracks here, which pretty much serves more as an outro rather than a core track. The first half is almost entirely instrumental, and it's decent but very slow with its comforting keys, minimal percussion, and xhef harmonizing with the background vocals. xhef finally comes in proper after 2 minutes and really only delivers this singular repeated refrain over and over again. It's technically the end of our protagonist's story and is another instance of a really vague track that, yet again, I had to get xhef's help with, and that I'm not going to speak a word on, so you can piece the finale together yourself. All I will say is it's a great way to close the album and the concept, but I think out of all the tracks on an individual standpoint, this is the one I'm least likely to return to. And finally, the closer, The Flip Side, which has this absolutely massive feature list of different producers from all around underground hip-hop. I'm not even going to list them all, you can probably just read them here. Anyway, this is the longest track on the record at a staggering 8 minutes, and honestly, it's a bit of a weird one from a shallow perspective. Basically, xhef is the sole MC of the track, and the entire runtime is full of splice snippets and remixes of other songs he's done with each producer. It may seem like an odd and possibly unnecessary inclusion, but xhef also told me that this track fits in with the concept, and the reason why is kind of brilliant. And again, as much as I want to say, I really shouldn't just be giving out all the secrets and answers, but it is truly a great closer. Overall, I have quite a lot of thoughts on Terminal Terminal. Let me just get this out of the way right now. I think this is xhef's best body of work yet. Intricately woven, masterfully written, beautifully produced as well. Huge shout out to Filip Neuf on his production job. I feel like I didn't give him enough credit during this review. However, I do believe this record has a bit of a large flaw that prevents me from giving it a higher rating. And it's not a fault of xhef, Filip Neuf, or anyone who worked on this record for that matter. For a record to be excellent or even perfect in my eyes, I feel like it needs to have a good fusion of replayability, memorability, and a sheer wow factor to sweep me off my feet. And I feel like this album checks off 2 boxes, with the sole weak spot being replayability. That's an inherent flaw of most concept records for me, especially ones that are specifically designed to be listened to in one whole sitting, is that the tracks can't really shine as individual pieces. Comparing this to xhef's previous record, Extension of the Hand, that I also reviewed positively, I would honestly say that record is a more well-rounded experience. I have revisited several tracks on their own and have enjoyed my time with them from that album. But with Terminal Terminal here, I will probably only come back to 2, maybe 3 songs out of the 11 here. I know I've been a bit negative on these closing remarks, so I want to reiterate one more time that I believe this album is his best. Certainly more magnetizing than Extension was in the grand scheme of a holistic album experience. And if anything, I want this review to be more of a recommendation to xhef's discography. If you're looking for rich, detailed hip-hop records that you can spend months combing over and still find new things to enjoy and hold on to, this is your guy, for sure. But I do believe this record could have been one of the best this year had it just been given a bit more replay value. Still, I am feeling an 8 out of 10 on this album. Well guys, hope you enjoyed that review. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.